The 2-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine has now come and gone. President Zelensky of Ukraine giving a landmark speech in which he pleaded for more Western aid, but in which he also made a comment which we simply can't just let pass by because it really demonstrates the level of delusion right now inside the Ukrainian government and really the willful lies that are being propagated to the American people. Let's put this up there then on the screen. In the speech, President Zelensky claimed with a straight face, Krystal, that the tally of the number of Ukrainian soldiers who've been killed is 31,000. Now, as even the New York Times remarks, quote, U.S. officials have said that the number is closer to 70,000. I would say that both of those estimates are dramatically underestimating the number of people who have been killed in the conflict. Because if we square it with everything that we know, even in terms of past estimates, in terms of the amputation numbers, in terms of the fact, if you've only had 31,000 people who are killed, then why is the average age inside the Ukrainian military 50 years old? Why are you kidnapping disabled people off the street who are like 45 with one leg or whatever, who've been previously dismissed, and allowing them to serve? Why have 650,000, prime age males have also fled the country, and that's how we know that the remainder of the population is not there? So if we know the fleeing estimate, and if we know the previous population of Ukraine, the number is very likely in the hundreds of thousands. That is far more, likely of an estimate. I would just put this up there from the New York Times, again, only a few months ago, which they seem to have forgotten. Even according to U.S. officials, the death toll, and well, they include death and injuries, this was back in August of 2023. So there have been several, probably thousands, tens of thousands since then, was near 500,000. Now, they're claiming, a little bit more for the Russians. That's probably likely in terms of what the overall number is, but we don't know what it is. We don't know if it's 300,000, which is what the Ukrainians claim. But at the very least, Krystal, the reason why I felt so compelled that we had to cover this is that there are people in this country who believe that, including, the Times, the media. People are pointing to this as some sort of evidence of victory by the Ukrainian forces. Like, again, they are claiming with a straight face, Krystal, that they have had 31,000 killed and the Russians have had 300,000. So either they are the greatest defensive force known to man, or they're lying. And that's unfortunate because they're pleading for more weapons and for more support when they are barely able to recruit 50-something-year people who are old. They have people who are 70 in the Ukrainian armed forces who are on the front line, many of whom just mass surrendered in one of their biggest strategic defeats in years on the battlefield. It's like the reality on the ground and the propaganda narrative is diverging at a historic level, and yet a lot of people in the establishment of this country, including the media, are buying it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, even, again, to underscore, the U.S. official assessment is more than double what Zelensky is claiming here. And I think most estimates are that the Russians have more killed on their side. They outnumber Ukrainians on the battlefield almost 3-1. They also have a massively larger population in order to refill their ranks.
Right.
So, yes, they have probably suffered more casualties. They're also in a better position to continue the fight and send more soldiers to the front line. The manpower issue for Ukraine is just as critical as the ammunition shortage is for Ukraine, if not more at this point. I think the reason why it's important to talk about just the brazen nature of this lie is because it's consistent with some of the domestic criticism that Zelensky has faced, including from some of his own military commanders, about this propaganda bubble that he has created and persisted with. So it's one thing, look, you're in wartime, trying to prop up the population, keep them positive, showcase whatever victories you're having on the battlefield, keep morale up, et cetera. I think anyone would expect any country to do that. It's another thing to just out and out lie about the reality of what's happening on the ground and the defeats that are being suffered and the level of suffering that occurs. I can't imagine that, Ukrainians are the ones who know the people who are dying and being killed, know the people who are coming back with limbs lost, know the men who are having to flee the country to avoid getting scooped up, know the people with intellectual disabilities who are being sent to the front lines, et cetera. I can't imagine that they buy this crap either. So that, to me, is what's so noteworthy, is just how even the New York Times can't take this with a straight face because it is such a brazen lie and so at odds with the reality as it actually exists.
Yeah, and that's the U.S. estimate, which again is dramatically undercounted. Let's put this up here again, which is on the screen, because I feel really compelled, if Zelensky's not going to speak to the reality of the situation. In Ukraine, the amputations, this was in August of 2023, the number of Ukrainians who had lost limbs had already reached the levels that 4 years of the First World War had incurred for Germans and Britons who went through the entire 4.5-year war. This is a war where we learned about the devastating effects of artillery, of modern machinery, machine guns, and this is what they incurred in just a year and a half. It's been 6 months or so since this piece came out. How many more tens of thousands have then suffered amputations? It just doesn't, it flies completely in the course of, it strains credulity, as you said in our beginning, that we could have First World War level amputation and tend to have more than, half the number who have been killed in action. Not even the most, strenuous Ukraine believers would privately admit anything like this. And yet, that's what they want us to believe. And the reason why, again, we're spending so much time on this is that they are in pure desperation right now. And it appears that we are going to enable that with some of the most devastating consequences. Let's put this up there, please, on the screen. And the very same time that Zelensky is giving this speech, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, is now hinting that Ukraine, this is from a Ukrainian outlet, is hinting that Ukraine could use F-16s, quote, for strikes on military targets inside of Russia. So let's make very clear that President Biden allegedly extracted a promise from the Ukrainians that they would not do that. And yet, here's the NATO Secretary General who is saying that he would endorse such a policy. We have also seen in recent months, Krystal, the use of U.S. weapons by the Ukrainian forces deep inside of uncontested Russian territory. For example, in places like Rostov. Well, they claim it's a military depot, and yet they're using the exact same tactics of the Russians. They're hitting civilian infrastructure, and they're killing kids in some instance. I'm not saying that, they're on the same level or whatever, but if you're going to drag yourself down into that, and you, in the last gambles, as you're losing these major battles on the battlefield, are going to be throwing things out like that, that's probably the scenario most likely to lead to some sort of war. And then on top of, it's like, I can't stop, we have more inclinations that people want to, like the new candidates for NATO Secretary General, because this man is outgoing. Many of them are committing to a policy that Ukraine will eventually be in NATO. And President Putin gave a speech just yesterday. He's like, let's be very clear. If that happens, we will be in a full-blown nuclear war. I mean, it's, maybe he's lying. I'd rather not find out.
Yeah.
That's one of those, we just have to be real here in terms of the manpower situation, the ammunition situation, and desperate people often resort to desperate things, which I don't blame them. I probably would too. But if, just like in the Israel situation, if we're going to co-sign, we're going to give you the weapons to do it, then we could be considered an active combatant in the same thing.
No, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think part of why Zelensky felt the need to put out there such a brazen lie that even the New York Times isn't buying at this point is because he needs to, for the U.S. audience, mask the incredible suffering of his own people. Because I think if people really understood what the costs have been of prosecuting and continuing to prosecute this war, that raises some very uncomfortable questions for the continued level of support going forward, which doesn't mean that people don't have sympathy for the Ukrainian cause. That doesn't mean that it's justifying Russian actions. But, this is the other cost of having a president who is so infirm and unintelligible that he can't sit for a single basic interview, is there is no accounting of how they think this is all going to end, how they think this is going, where they think this is going, what the, ultimate end game is. We used to have some theory of the spring offensive and their hand will be strengthened, then maybe they'll come to the What is the theory now? What would this additional aid package, what is that going to get us? What is that going to get the Ukrainians? Where is that going to put us all at the end of the day? So, I mean, that's the piece that has long been missing here is you may hate the idea of a negotiated settlement that would include some sort of, giving up some portion of the previous, the Ukrainian land to Russia. You may absolutely hate that idea. I think that it is incredibly unjust. I'm not claiming that it is. But what's the alternative? What's the alternative at this point? What is the theory of the case for how you're going to get to a solution that you find to be better, that you find to be superior? And that's how, I mean, that's the logic, Saagar, of how these wars always continue indefinitely. I mean, it's the same thing. That's why we ended up staying in Afghanistan forever. These other presidents weren't stupid. They knew that it was not a good situation. They knew that if we left, it was not going to be a good situation. And so they just, the easy logic is, all right, we'll just keep it going. We'll just pass the buck, rather than actually try to bring this thing to some sort of a conclusion, ugly or not.
Well, the tragedy is that as a result of the policy of the West and enabling Zelensky's, literal egotism, fanaticism, and now delusion, is that they are in a way worse position today than they were at the beginning of the war.
No doubt
now
about
they
it.
have lost their entire generation of Ukrainian men. I just saw a video today of a single local recruitment person in Ukraine. They pulled $1 million out of shoeboxes that he had in his apartment because he was taking bribes to let people out of the draft. I mean, this is one guy in one depot inside Ukraine. And they're all US dollars too, just so we're all aware in terms of where that currency is coming from. That's just one guy. The grift, the graft, it is extraordinary to a degree that you can barely understand. And on top of all of that, our major Russian battlefield victories are a Russian, moving away from conscription, successfully backfilling all of the 300,000 people that have either been killed and or injured. They've had a very successful program by basically bribing people in the Caucasus regions to come and join the military. Very willing, it appears, to be fight and to use attrition-style warfare. In terms of Navalny and all that, he basically, somebody died, his major political opponent. He's never been more in control of Russia. They are going to produce 4.5 million artillery shells in 2024, according to the Estonians. It could actually be even higher. Our best estimate for Europe and the United States, couple 100,000. It's like between the manpower, between the power imbalance, between the will, it's a devastating situation. The longer they keep this going, they're going to lose even more of their country and they're going to lose even more of their people to be killed. It will actually put them in a position where Putin is the least likely to negotiate. If he's, has breakthroughs on, I was reading one military analyst that compared some of these recent breakthroughs that have already happened to the initial opening gambles that led the Germans to capitulate in the First World War. Just to put it into perspective, many of the gains from their original counteroffensive of that have been now won back by the Russians. And you can't blame it just on artillery, because we don't even have the ammunition to deliver if we wanted it, which would only lead to F-16s, missiles, and other things being launched into Russia, which would only bring us all into a worse situation. So bleak situation that's happening over there.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.